Hi. Glad you're back again. Are you having a good month? It just seems like it was just Christmas a couple weeks ago, doesn't it? And pretty soon it's going to be Easter. The year's going fast, isn't it? Well, you remember 3 weeks ago, we started reading a book called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, written by a man called C.S. Lewis. And The Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe was about 4 kids, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, and how they found their way through a wardrobe in the spare room, pushed their way to the back, and entered a magical kingdom called Narnia. And in Narnia was under the power of an evil white witch who kept it always winter and never Christmas. Terrible, huh? But with the help of a talking lion called Aslan, who turned out to be the creator of Narnia and all the talking creatures in it, they defeated the White Witch. And then, eventually, they came back through the wardrobe, and we don't know what happened next, right? Not yet. Well, then last week, we read a story called Finding Narnia, which was the story of Mr. Lewis and his older brother, Warnie. And remember, Mr. Lewis is always called Jack. And Jack and Warnie, from when they were young boys, and how they went to school in England, grew up, and how Jack began to write the first book of the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And we found out why there's a wardrobe. And it was a good story, wasn't it? Well, today we are reading book 2. It's a picture book of the whole book. The whole book is like 200 pages long. But this picture book is a short version, and it's got great pictures. So let's read, okay? The Return to Narnia. The Rescue of Prince Caspian. Based on the book Prince Caspian by C.S. Lewis. Illustrated by Matthew S. Armstrong. Once, 4 children named Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy walked through a magic wardrobe into a land called Narnia. They had wonderful adventures there and became great kings and queens. But after ruling in the castle of Cair Paravel, they came back home to England. That was a year ago. Now they sat in a railway station, sad and gloomy because they were on their way to school. And you remember from reading about Finding Narnia, Jack and Warnie had to leave their home and go to school someplace else, right? So that's what Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy are doing. They're getting ready to go away to school. Suddenly, they felt a tugging and pulling. "Look sharp," Edmund shouted. "This feels like magic." Then the station disappeared, and they found themselves in a wood. "Can we possibly be back in Narnia?" asked Lucy. "We could be anywhere," said Peter, and they set off to explore. They walked and walked until they came to an old broken-down castle. "It gives me a strange feeling," said Lucy. Susan found a golden chess piece, just like one they used to have in Narnia. Peter cried, "These ruins must be Cair Paravel itself." "Let's find out," said Edmund. What had happened in Narnia? Well, they were gone. Peter led them down some deep, dark steps. "Cheer up," he said. "If this is Narnia, we're kings and queens here, not just kids." Sure enough, they found a room filled with treasure. Lucy's magic cordial and dagger, Peter's weapons, and Susan's bow and arrows. "My horn is missing," said Susan. "Where could it be?" They wondered what or who had brought them back to Narnia. The next morning, they met a dwarf named Trumpkin, who told them that Caspian, the true king of Narnia, needed help. His evil uncle Miraz had stolen the throne, and now Narnia was not free. The trees did not walk. The animals did not talk. No one remembered about 4 children who had once helped save the land from the evil White Witch. And the great lion Aslan had not been seen for a very long time. So Caspian had fled, planning to raise an army to fight Miraz. He took only one treasure from the palace: Queen Susan's horn. Caspian had ridden all night and day until he found an army of old Narnians in hiding. There were badgers, giants, fawns, centaurs, and the valiant chief mouse, Reepicheep. "Long live King Caspian!" they cheered. Then the 2 armies met on a hill called Aslan's How, and the battle had gone very poorly for Caspian. That's when he blew the horn, hoping that High King Peter, King Edmund, and Queens Susan and Lucy would return to Narnia. So that's what happened, huh? He blew the horn, and poof! They vanished from England and ended up in Narnia. "So, it was your horn, Sue, that pulled us back to Narnia yesterday," said Peter. "No offense," said Trumpkin, "but we were expecting great warriors, not children." But when Edmund beat him in a fencing match and Susan outshot him with her bow and arrows, Trumpkin began to believe that they could help save Narnia. "We must join Prince Caspian at once," said Peter, and together they set off for Aslan's How. They went to sleep that night, hoping they could find Caspian in time. Later, as Lucy crept into the woods, the forest seemed almost alive. "Oh, trees, wake!" she called out. "Don't you remember me?" When Lucy was last in Narnia, the trees had talked to her. But this time nothing happened. The next morning they came to a wild gorge. "We're lost," said Peter. "No, no, look," cried Lucy. "There's Aslan. He wants us to follow him." But no one could see the lion except Lucy, so they went another way, no matter what Lucy said. They didn't get very far before the path was blocked. As they turned back, Edmund said, "Lou, you're a hero for not saying I told you so." And that night, Lucy heard the voice she loved best calling her. She found Aslan among the dancing trees and ran to him full of joy. "Welcome, Lucy," the lion said. "Wake the others now and follow me." So Lucy led the way, while Trumpkin mumbled about the silliness of following magic lions. Suddenly Edmund saw a huge shadow. "Aslan!" he cried. "3 cheers for Lucy!" said Peter. believing her at last. At the top of the gorge, there was Aslan himself. After greeting each one, he sent the boys and Trumpkin to Caspian, but kept Lucy and Susan with him. The lion raised his head, shook his mane, and roared. The sound rose until it floated all over Narnia, and Lucy and Susan saw a great wave rushing toward them. It was the trees come to life. They bowed to Aslan and joined in a wild romp. Old Narnia was awake and on the move. Meanwhile, the boys and Trumpkin arrived at Caspian's camp. "It is the High King Peter and King Edmund," Trumpkin announced. "Your Majesties are welcome," said Caspian. "We're here to help you become king," Peter said to Caspian. "Aslan and the girls are close, but we will do what we can on our own against Miraz and his men." And then they had breakfast together. Then the battle began, with Peter and Miraz fighting each other. Peter was a great warrior and fought well. When Miraz was betrayed and unexpectedly killed by one of his own men, Peter shouted, "To arms, Narnia! 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 The lion!" Edmund shouted as he too rushed into battle. Then, with a roar like the ocean, the trees Aslan had awakened poured over the battlefield. In a few minutes, all Miraz's men had run away. After Aslan appeared with Susan and Lucy, Caspian knelt and kissed the lion's paw. "Prince," said Aslan, "under us and under the High King, you shall now be king of Narnia." And then there was a great feast that night till long after the stars came out. The next day, Aslan made a door appear in the air. "Come on," Peter said to his brother and sisters. "Our time is up." And it was. They walked through the door and found themselves back at the railway station. "Well," said Peter, "we have had an adventure." The end. Narnia! Narnia! The lion! Oops. You caught me. I was pretending to be Edmund. Do you like to pretend? I do. It's fun, isn't it? And I kept thinking, oh, I remember when Mr. Lewis, Jack, when he was a boy, we found out last week he liked to read stories about heroes and knights and people attack. And I thought, oh, I can see why he wrote this book, because he loves this kind of stuff, right? And it is kind of fun, right? And I have some questions about the story. I was thinking about some things, and I wonder, what do you think? The first thing I noticed was, remember what the dwarf Trumpkin said when he finally saw Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy? He said, "We were expecting great warriors, not children." Do you have to be a grown-up to help, to do great things? What do you think? I think that's silly. I think that's one of the things Mr. Lewis, Jack is saying in these books. Just because you're a kid doesn't mean that you aren't important and that you can't do great things. Now, obviously, this is a pretend book, and we're not going to go to Narnia and take a sword and, defeat an army, right? But as kids, you can and you do great things to show God's love, to change the world. In fact, I'll tell you a secret. Next week, I'm going to read a book about a young girl called Ruby Bridges, who at 6 years old did something really brave and really helped change things in Louisiana in the year 1960. So come back next week and let's find out what exactly did 6-year-old Ruby Bridges do that was so brave. Come back next week.